Okay, now France is going to pass a bill. More than likely, it's going to get approved where they want to start taxing people based on their citizenship and also residence too. You know that's they've had that for years, but now they want to tax people based on the citizenship. So if it gets passed and you're a French national, it doesn't make any difference if you live inside the country or outside of France. They're going to try to tax you on your worldwide income, just like the U.S. does. But there are some differences. And actually, this program, and there was an article that came out in IMI newsletter. I'm going to read a couple of points on that. But one thing they, in the IMI newsletter, they mentioned like the France's program would be, it sounded like it would be better than the U.S.'s. It's worse. It's a lot worse. And I'm going to go through the differences and why it's worse. In fact, let's just start with the foreign overseas tax exclusion. The U.S. at least has, if you're outside the U.S. so many days a year. Now, this doesn't affect or help your investment income, but your earned income can get an exclusion per person for husband and wife. If you're outside the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen, and you live outside the U.S. so many days a year. For 2004, the maximum exclusion is $126,500 per person. If two individuals are married, they both work abroad and meet either the bona fide residence test or the physical presence test, each one can choose the foreign earned income exclusion together, and they can exclude up to as much as $253,000 for the year 2024. Now, France is not offering this. Actually, it's not in the bill that came out that I've read. Now, if this is excluding some of the other parts of the bill, I haven't seen this, so I haven't seen anything on any overseas exclusion. Literally, if you make up to $253,000 and you're a U.S. citizen and you're working abroad, let's say you're in a tax haven, a pure tax haven like Cayman Islands, that doesn't have an income tax. You can make on earned income, not investment income, earned income with that overseas exclusion for 2024, and this usually goes up every year, $253,000 for a husband and wife together. It's $126,500 US dollars each. Okay, France is not allowing that, and I'm going to go through that. At least right now, they're not showing any exclusion. Okay, and also, by the way, too, if you're trying to get out of your French passport, it's probably not going to do you any good. They're more than likely not going to. Even if you try to get out right now, it would probably take you 6 months to a year to get out of it. And they're probably going to go back at least, they might go back as far back as 2023, but more than likely they will go back only to 2024. But who knows? They could go back to everybody that got out maybe 5 years ago. I don't know how it's going to read. But most people don't get out of their French passport because the French passport is so good unless they have something like a new law like this. Unless they want to get citizenship in another country in the last 5 years that required them to relinquish their French passport to get their new passport. But most people would not do that because the French passport is so good. I mean, you're looking at, it's the second best passport in the world. In fact, it's actually tied, it's number 2. It's tied with several different countries. But you're looking at roughly about 192 countries, visa-free or visa-free on arrival, countries and territories that you can go to with a French passport. And you're looking at countries that that are tied with is Germany, Italy, Japan, and Spain. And that's a lot of countries you can go to. That's top notch. But now people question, is it really worth that? Would they be better off maybe going with an Irish passport? And then you can go back in as a non-dom. But the problem is that you have to have another passport in place. You relinquish your French passport and then go to Ireland. Ireland does have a non-dom status that you can go in, and literally they only tax you on remittance basis. But more than likely, you're going to have to pay an exit tax getting out of this. They haven't come out with that yet, but I can tell you it's probably going to be pretty steep, okay? And it probably will not do you any good trying to get out of it now. But the great thing is that if you're going to do this, if you're going to exit, you're better off getting another passport, like a quick passport in the Caribbean. And the ones that have the best tax laws are Antigua and St. Kitts that doesn't have an income tax. Then if you want to get an Irish passport, you can have your domicile now, since you've relinquished your French passport, You have your domicile now in St. Kitts or Antigua, whichever one you pick. Then get the Irish passport. Don't get the Irish passport first after you relinquish your French passport, because that will be determined as your domicile, and you will not get all the tax breaks that's offered in Ireland if you do that. So you need to get another passport first, and then that passport, whether it's St. Kitts or whatever, will be your new domicile. Then you get what's called a non-dom status in Ireland. But the only problem with that is Ireland is part of the EU, and I've been telling people in other videos over and over and over again that some country in the EU would be the first one that would come out with a citizenship-based taxation. Didn't know which one it was, but I assumed it would be a country like either Spain, France, one of these other countries in the EU that has real high taxes. And France has got top brackets as high as 45%. So I knew that it was going to be coming, and I thought maybe the EU might even come out with this altogether, but the likelihood is pretty low that they would all come out with this, because there are conservative countries that have non-dom type programs that they're luring a lot of wealthy foreigners in, and these are countries like Cyprus, you're looking at Malta, Ireland, that have pretty high taxes. Like Ireland's got brackets as high as 40-something%, but that's if you're domiciled there. If you go in there as a non-dom status, you got a passport as good as this French passport, but you're only taxed on remitted money that in the country. So you literally can live there almost income tax free in Ireland, which is a really nice deal. But the problem is if the EU puts pressure on Ireland eventually to give up their non-dom type program, that would be and I can't see that getting better. Okay, it's as good as it's going to get there. Okay, if anything, they had this non-dom program there for several hundred years. It's been around for a long time, but they could lose that status. If they do, then what are you going to do? Pay another exit tax again? This is the problem with the EU. There are other passports, and I've mentioned that too. There are two things wrong with Ireland: the weather, which I mentioned over and over again, and I've mentioned many times too, is the problem with what happens if they come out with a citizenship-based taxation system like the U.S. has, and maybe France will come out with also. So this is something you're going to really have to think about, because you are taking a big chance getting citizenship in an EU country. You might want to stick with, I gave a video, in fact, I think it was the last video we did, on the best places in the world to get a passport. Now, I did have a couple of them on there that were EU countries, and that was Cyprus and Ireland, but there were a lot of other countries in there that had the most visa-free travel, English-speaking, that you don't run into this problem in the EU, okay, because you're taking that chance. Most of the other countries were very sovereign countries. They don't have all this pressure, to try to change their tax system. These are the countries I would be trying to stick with. Otherwise, you could be forced to pay another exit tax on top of this. And I'm not saying that France is going to come out with it, but I can tell you they would be stupid not to do it, because they know that people are going to get out of that passport, and they want to try to get as much as they can out of that person before they leave for good. And the only way to do it is come out with an exit tax. And it could be 50%. I don't know what it's going to be. But I guarantee you, I would say there's a 90% chance when that bill comes out, it's finalized, there's going to be a high exit tax to get out of France. Okay? So I don't see that. I just can't see any other way except that occurring. Now, the key thing is when you're getting these passports, if you get a chance to, go to our website, www.citizenshipquickly.com. Look at the top where it's got flag theory. Look at the top of that and read the flag theory. It goes in detail on what you need to be looking for when you get a second passport, and it will keep you out of this mess that I'm talking about right now. And this is what you want to be looking at. Also, folks, if you can do us a big favor, we don't monetize our channel, and you can do us a real big favor and hit the subscribe button right here, right on your screen. And also, I would like, if you got friends, pass this video around to them. If you got high net worth friends, because we deal with people that are only high net worth. And also go to our website, www.citizenshipquickly.com, and just ask for some help. And give us a thumbs up if you like our video. That helps in the algorithm. We don't ask for money, but just give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and that can help us out a lot. All right, now let me go through some points in the IMI newsletter on what's going to be happening here and what they're talking about, and then you can try to make a defined decision But I think it's a little bit too late to try to get out of the passport now. I think they're going to come out with an exit tax, and we'll know when this thing is approved. If it's approved, maybe it won't get approved. But France, I'm really surprised these EU countries have not come out with this to begin with. Now, the French Finance Committee adopts this bill aiming to introduce citizenship-based taxation. Now, France's Finance Committee has adopted an amendment to establish a targeted universal tax requiring French citizens living in countries with lower tax rates to continue paying taxes to France. Now, the proposed system will require French nationals who've lived in France for at least 3 years within the decade before relocating to pay taxes equivalent to their hypothetical French tax burden. Now, to prevent double taxation, the amendment outlines a tax credit mechanism for French citizens living abroad. Now, under this framework, they must pay taxes equivalent to what they would owe in France, but receive a credit matching any taxes already paid in their country of residence. Now, the scope extends beyond income tax to include inheritance tax, capital gains, and dividends. So you're not going to be escaping these. You're going to have to be paying it in one country or the other unless you give up that French passport. Now, the amendment, which repeats a proposal from a 2019 fact-finding mission by Finance Committee Chairman Eric Coquerel and Jean-Paul Mattei, applies to low-tax jurisdictions. The authors claim compatibility with European law and existing tax conventions. The LFI-NFP group developed this targeted approach to address international tax competition and prevent tax burden shifts to the working and middle classes. Unlike the American model of citizenship-based taxation, which affects all U.S. citizens globally, the French proposal targets only those living in countries with tax rates at least 50% lower than France's. But they don't mention anything about the overseas tax exclusion the U.S. offers. That they're not saying anything about this with France. That means your first roughly $253,000 for a husband and wife, if you qualify for the foreign overseas exclusion in the U.S., all of that's totally tax-free. The U.S. is not going to come back, at least with existing laws, and say, hey, you got it free from Cayman Islands or whatever, that we want you to tax on that first 250 since you weren't taxed in the Caymans. Well, the U.S. doesn't do that. But France, it says like here, they want to go back. If you're living in a pure tax haven and there's no income tax, they want to get what you actually saved in taxes. This is a lot worse deal than what the U.S. has got by long ways. And also the U.S. has got also a law that you can literally set up a foreign corporation, get the foreign corporation to pay your salary, and the foreign corporation doesn't have to pay FICA taxes. That's another roughly 15% right there, not including the state and federal taxes wherever you came from. If you came from a state that did have a state income tax in the U.S. So I can tell you the U.S.'s deal is a lot better deal than France's deal. And my whole thing is, how much are you going to lose to get out of this passport if you get out? And if you're already living overseas, man, you're going to have a huge tax increase, especially if you're one of these guys living in the Caymans or Dubai or whatever, where you're paying little to no income taxes. This is going to hit you hard, okay? It's not going to do you any good unless you give up that French passport. Now, the National Rally Party supports the measure with RNMP Jean-Philippe Tanguy, linking it to citizenship rights and duties. The former presidential majority and Republicans oppose the measure. Roland Lescure, who represents French citizens in the United States and Canada, cites concerns about implementation and its impact on citizens abroad. Now, Jean-Paul Mattei from the Democratic Movement, MoDem, it's a centrist political party. It raises questions about the proposal's structure, noting that citizens living abroad do not access French public services while facing potential taxation. Well, neither did they do in the U.S. But the U.S., if you go beyond that overseas tax exclusion, the U.S. still wants you to pay U.S. taxes, even if you don't live in the U.S., even if you never go back to the U.S. Okay, I've always wanted that myself, but they do it anyway, and that's the problem with socialism. But the amendment aims to address what the government has termed a problem of lower revenue while strengthening France's position in international tax harmonization negotiations. The measure now requires a National Assembly vote. The government maintains the option to override it using Article 49.3 of the Constitution, though the Assembly's current composition of 126 RN and 193 NPF deputies could affect this decision. Now, Cockrell notes the challenge of modifying 129 bilateral tax agreements for implementation. He indicates the text may undergo revisions before the final vote. If you want to know more on this, folks, go to our website, www.citizenshipquickly.com. If you want to legally get around high income taxes or how to get a second passport as quick as 4 to 8 months. And if you want to get videos like this automatically and also help us on the algorithm, just give us a thumbs up if you like the video and hit the subscribe button right on your screen right here. And you'll get new videos automatically as they come out, and pass this video around to other people. Again, we don't monetize this, but you can do us a big favor if you do this, and I look forward to talking to you on the next video. Take care.